My name is Carlos, and I was the demolition expert for the PIRU Bloods, the man they called the Destroyer, because I could turn any building into rubble in minutes without leaving a trace of evidence. What I'm about to tell you will blow your mind, because it's not just about gang warfare. It's about the night I orchestrated the most devastating property destruction campaign in Los Angeles gang history, systematically destroying 50 CRIP houses in a single coordinated operation that lasted 12 hours and changed the balance of power in South Central forever. On September 8, 2003, I led a team of 20 specialists in what we called Operation Blackout, a military precision campaign that used explosives, accelerants, and psychological warfare to eliminate an entire rival gang's infrastructure in one night. If you think you understand what gang warfare looks like, if you think you know what it means to wage total war against your enemies, you're about to learn why sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a gun. It's the knowledge of how to make buildings disappear. The night I destroyed 50 houses didn't just eliminate our rivals' safe houses, it displaced over 300 people, caused millions in damage, and triggered a gang war that lasted 3 years and claimed over 100 lives. Before we go deeper, let me be absolutely clear about why I'm sharing this story. I'm not here to glorify destruction or make myself sound like some kind of mastermind. I'm here to warn you about what happens when gang warfare escalates beyond street-level violence into systematic terrorism that destroys entire communities. For 7 years, I was the demolition specialist for the PIRU Bloods, responsible for eliminating rival gang infrastructure through targeted destruction of buildings, vehicles, and other assets. I thought I was a strategic genius, using my engineering knowledge to give my set a decisive advantage over our enemies. I was wrong about everything. I wasn't a strategic genius. I was a terrorist who destroyed communities and displaced families for the sake of gang politics. I wasn't giving my set an advantage. I was escalating conflicts to levels that made everyone less safe and more vulnerable. I wasn't eliminating infrastructure. I was destroying the homes and businesses that held communities together, creating chaos that hurt innocent people more than it hurt our enemies. The night I destroyed 50 CRIP houses wasn't a victory. It was the beginning of a war that consumed everything I cared about and taught me that some weapons are too dangerous to use, even against your worst enemies. I grew up in Compton during the 1980s, when gang warfare was reaching new levels of sophistication and violence throughout Los Angeles County. My father was an electrician who taught me about wiring, circuits, and electrical systems before he was killed in a drive-by shooting when I was 14. My mother struggled to raise 3 children on her own, working multiple jobs while trying to keep us away from the streets that had claimed their father. But the PIRU Bloods weren't just a gang in our neighborhood. They were the dominant social and economic force, offering protection, income, and most importantly, a chance to get revenge against the Crips, who had killed my father. I joined when I was 16, but unlike most recruits who started as street soldiers or drug dealers, I was identified early as having technical skills that could be valuable to the organization. My knowledge of electrical systems, construction techniques, and chemistry made me a natural candidate for demolition work, the specialized role of destroying enemy infrastructure to weaken their operational capabilities. The older members began training me in the use of explosives, accelerants, and other tools of destruction, teaching me how to make buildings collapse, vehicles explode, and electrical systems fail on command. I thought this knowledge made me powerful and valuable, but it actually made me the most dangerous person in my own community. The role of a demolition expert in gang warfare is unlike any other position in the organization. While soldiers fight enemies and dealers generate revenue, demolition specialists wage war against the physical infrastructure that allows rival gangs to operate. The job requires technical knowledge of construction, electrical systems, plumbing, and chemistry, combined with the tactical understanding of how to maximize damage while minimizing the risk of detection. You have to be able to study a building for days or weeks, identifying structural weaknesses, access points, and the most effective methods of destruction. You have to understand how to use explosives, accelerants, and other tools without leaving forensic evidence that can be traced back to you or your organization. Most importantly, you have to be able to coordinate multiple simultaneous operations across a wide geographic area, timing everything perfectly to achieve maximum psychological impact. I thought I was perfect for this role because I had the technical skills and the emotional detachment necessary to destroy other people's homes and businesses without feeling guilt or remorse. What I didn't understand was that the emotional detachment required for demolition work would eventually cut me off from my own humanity, making it impossible to see the people I was hurting as anything more than obstacles to be eliminated. My reputation as a demolition expert grew throughout the Blood Nation during my first 4 years in the role. I was credited with destroying over 200 targets, including crack houses, gang headquarters, safe houses, and the personal residences of high-ranking CRIP members. The precision of my work and the impossibility of tracing the destruction back to our set made me a legend in the gang world. Some people thought I had supernatural abilities. Others believed I was working with corrupt city officials who helped me access buildings and utilities. The PIRU blood leadership used my reputation as a psychological weapon, letting it be known that anyone who crossed our set might wake up to find their home reduced to rubble. The fear I generated was more valuable than the actual destruction I caused, because it made our enemies paranoid and defensive, always worried about protecting their property instead of focusing on offensive operations against us. But with that reputation came increasing pressure to take on larger and more complex targets, more dangerous assignments that pushed the boundaries of what one person could accomplish. The leadership began to see me as capable of solving any problem through destruction, and they started planning operations that would require levels of coordination and violence that I had never attempted before. The planning phase for Operation Blackout began 6 months before the actual night of destruction, when PIRU blood leadership decided that the only way to permanently eliminate the Grape Street Watts Crips as a threat was to destroy their entire operational infrastructure in a single coordinated attack. The Grape Street Crips controlled over 60 properties throughout South Central, including drug houses, safe houses, meeting locations, and the personal residences of key members. Intelligence gathering had identified 50 of these properties as essential to their operations, and the decision was made to eliminate all of them in one night to prevent any possibility of retaliation or reconstruction. The operation would require a level of coordination and technical expertise that had never been attempted in gang warfare, involving multiple teams, sophisticated timing, and the use of military-grade equipment and techniques. I was chosen to lead the operation because of my track record and technical knowledge, but I was also given resources and support that I had never had access to before. A team of 20 specialists, unlimited funding for equipment and materials, and 6 months to plan every detail of the most ambitious destruction campaign in Los Angeles history. The target selection process for Operation Blackout was methodical and ruthless, designed to maximize both the operational damage to the Grape Street Crips and the psychological impact on the broader gang community. We identified 50 properties that were essential to their operations, including their main headquarters, primary drug distribution centers, weapons storage facilities, and the homes of their top leadership. Each target was studied for weeks, with teams conducting surveillance to identify security measures, occupancy patterns, structural vulnerabilities, and the best methods of approach and destruction. We created detailed floor plans, electrical schematics, and structural analyses for every building, identifying the most efficient ways to cause maximum damage with minimum risk of detection. The targets were divided into 5 categories based on their importance and the level of destruction required. Some would be completely demolished, others would be rendered uninhabitable through selective damage, and a few would be destroyed in ways that would send specific psychological messages to our enemies. The planning was so detailed that we knew exactly how long each operation would take, what materials would be needed, and what the aftermath would look like before we ever set foot on the first target. The team I assembled for Operation Blackout was unlike anything that had ever been organized for gang warfare. In addition to myself as the technical leader, we had 4 explosive specialists who had learned their skills in the military, 6 arsonists who understood how to use accelerants and timing devices, 4 electrical experts who could disable security systems and cause power failures, 3 structural engineers who could identify the most effective points of attack, and 3 logistics coordinators who would manage transportation, communication, and timing across all 50 targets. Each team member was chosen for their specific technical skills and their ability to work under pressure in coordinated operations. We spent months training together, practicing on abandoned buildings and conducting smaller test operations to perfect our techniques and timing. The level of preparation was military in its precision and scope, with detailed contingency plans for every possible scenario and backup systems for every critical component of the operation. We had communication equipment, transportation vehicles, and enough explosives and accelerants to level a small city. The operation was planned like a military assault on enemy territory, because that's exactly what it was. We were going to war against an entire neighborhood, and we intended to win decisively. The night of September 8, 2003, began at 10 p.m. with the final briefing and equipment check for all 20 team members. Each person knew their specific targets, their timing requirements, and their escape routes in case something went wrong. The operation was designed to unfold in 5 phases over 12 hours, with each phase targeting a different category of properties and using different methods of destruction. Phase 1 would eliminate the outer security and communication infrastructure. Phase 2 would target the main operational facilities. Phase 3 would destroy the leadership's personal residences. Phase 4 would eliminate the remaining safe houses and meeting locations, and Phase 5 would create diversionary fires and explosions to confuse law enforcement response and cover our withdrawal. The timing was critical. Each phase had to be completed within specific time windows to maintain the element of surprise and prevent our enemies from organizing effective countermeasures. At 11:47 p.m., I gave the signal to begin Phase 1, and 20 specialists disappeared into the night to begin the most devastating property destruction campaign in Los Angeles gang history. Phase 1 of Operation Blackout, from midnight to 2 a.m., focused on eliminating the Grape Street Crips communication and security infrastructure to blind them to what was coming. My electrical specialists systematically disabled the power grid serving their main territories, cutting electricity to entire city blocks and making it impossible for them to coordinate responses or call for help. The explosives teams destroyed cell phone towers and communication equipment, while the arsonists eliminated security camera networks and alarm systems that might have detected our approach to the main targets. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. The Grape Street Crips found themselves operating in complete darkness, unable to communicate with each other or monitor their territory for threats. By 2 a.m., we had successfully isolated our enemies and created the perfect conditions for the main assault phase. The precision of the timing and the coordination between teams was flawless. Every target was eliminated exactly on schedule, and no law enforcement response was detected. The Grape Street Crips knew something was happening, but they had no idea of the scale of the attack that was about to unfold, or their complete inability to stop it. Phase 2, from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., was the heart of Operation Blackout, the systematic destruction of the Grape Street Crips' main operational facilities. The explosives teams moved against their primary drug distribution centers, using precisely placed charges to collapse buildings while creating the appearance of accidental gas explosions. The arsonists targeted their weapons storage facilities, using accelerants and timing devices to create fires that would destroy evidence while appearing to be electrical failures. My structural specialists attacked their main headquarters, using selective demolition techniques to render the building uninhabitable, while leaving enough of the structure intact to send a clear message about our capabilities. The coordination required for this phase was extraordinary. 15 different targets had to be eliminated simultaneously to prevent any possibility of warning or retaliation. The sound of explosions and the glow of fires began to light up the south-central sky, but the emergency response was delayed and confused by the power outages and communication failures we had created in Phase 1. By 4 a.m., the Grape Street Crips had lost their entire operational infrastructure, but they still didn't understand the full scope of what was happening to them. Phase 3, from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., was the most personal and psychologically devastating part of the operation, the destruction of the leadership's personal residences and family properties. This phase was designed not just to eliminate safe houses, but to send a message that no one connected to the Grape Street Crips was safe from our reach. The targets included the homes of their top 5 leaders, their families' businesses, and properties where their children and elderly relatives lived. The methods used in this phase were particularly sophisticated. We used delayed action devices that would cause destruction hours after we had left the area, making it impossible to trace the attacks back to our teams. Some buildings were demolished completely, others were rendered uninhabitable through selective structural damage, and a few were destroyed in ways that created specific symbolic messages about the fate that awaited anyone who opposed the PIRU Bloods. The psychological impact on the Grape Street CRIP leadership was devastating. They realized that their families were not safe, their personal lives were not protected, and their enemies had capabilities that they had never imagined. By dawn, the most powerful CRIP set in South Central had been reduced to a collection of homeless, powerless individuals with no infrastructure, no communication, and no safe places to regroup. Phase 4, from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., focused on eliminating the remaining safe houses and meeting locations to ensure that the Grape Street Crips would have no way to reorganize or plan counterattacks. This phase required the most precision because many of these targets were in residential areas where innocent families lived, and we had to destroy specific buildings without harming neighboring properties. The techniques used included selective arson that would consume target buildings while leaving adjacent structures untouched, controlled explosions that would collapse specific sections of buildings, and electrical sabotage that would make properties uninhabitable without causing obvious structural damage. The timing of this phase was critical because law enforcement was finally beginning to respond to the earlier destruction, and we had to complete our objectives before police and fire departments could establish effective perimeters around the remaining targets. The coordination between teams was flawless. Every target was eliminated on schedule, and no team members were detected or apprehended during the operations. By 8 a.m., the Grape Street Crips had lost every single property that was essential to their operations, leaving them with no infrastructure, no resources, and no ability to function as an organized criminal enterprise. Phase 5, from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., was designed to create confusion and misdirection while covering our withdrawal from the operational area. The diversionary fires and explosions were set in locations that would draw law enforcement attention away from the main target areas, while also creating the impression that the destruction was more random and widespread than it actually was. This phase also included the elimination of any forensic evidence that might have been left behind during the earlier operations, using additional fires and chemical treatments to destroy DNA, fingerprints, and other traces that could be used to identify our team members. The psychological warfare component of this phase involved leaving specific messages and symbols at some of the destruction sites, making it clear that the PIRU Bloods were responsible for the attacks, while also demonstrating our technical capabilities and organizational sophistication. By 10 a.m., all 20 team members had successfully withdrawn from the operational area, and the full scope of Operation Blackout was becoming clear to law enforcement, the media, and the gang community. 50 properties had been destroyed or rendered uninhabitable, over 300 people had been displaced, and the Grape Street Watts Crips had been eliminated as an effective criminal organization in a single night of coordinated destruction. The immediate aftermath of Operation Blackout was chaos and disbelief, as law enforcement, media, and community leaders tried to understand what had happened and who was responsible. The scale of the destruction was unprecedented in Los Angeles gang history. 50 buildings destroyed or damaged, millions of dollars in property losses, and an entire neighborhood transformed into a disaster zone overnight. The coordination and technical sophistication of the attacks shocked investigators, who had never seen gang warfare conducted with such military precision and strategic planning. The Grape Street Crips were completely unable to respond or retaliate because they had no infrastructure, no communication systems, and no safe locations where they could regroup and plan counterattacks. The psychological impact on the broader gang community was enormous. Every set in Los Angeles realized that the PIRU Bloods had capabilities that made traditional gang warfare obsolete, and many smaller organizations began seeking alliances or truces rather than risk becoming targets of similar operations. The media coverage was extensive and sensationalized, with news crews broadcasting live from the destruction sites and experts struggling to explain how such a coordinated attack could have been planned and executed without detection by law enforcement. The law enforcement response to Operation Blackout revealed the complete inadequacy of traditional policing methods for dealing with sophisticated criminal organizations. The LAPD, FBI, and ATF launched massive investigations involving hundreds of agents and millions of dollars in resources, but they were unable to identify any of the team members or gather sufficient evidence for prosecutions. The technical sophistication of the operation had eliminated most forensic evidence. The coordination between teams had prevented witnesses from identifying specific individuals, and the use of delayed action devices had made it impossible to establish timelines that could be used to track our movements. The investigators were dealing with a level of criminal organization that they had never encountered before, a gang that operated like a military unit with technical specialists, strategic planning, and operational security that rivaled government agencies. The failure to solve the case or prevent similar attacks led to congressional hearings, policy changes, and increased funding for anti-gang operations. But it also demonstrated the limitations of law enforcement when faced with enemies who understood their methods and capabilities. The investigation continued for years without producing any arrests or convictions, making Operation Blackout one of the most successful unsolved crimes in Los Angeles history. The long-term consequences of Operation Blackout extended far beyond the immediate destruction and displacement it caused. The elimination of the Grape Street Watts Crips created a power vacuum in South Central that led to 3 years of warfare as other gangs fought to control their former territory and operations. The violence that followed was more intense and widespread than anything that had preceded it, as multiple organizations used increasingly sophisticated weapons and tactics to establish dominance in the area. The civilian casualties were enormous. Over 100 people died in gang-related violence during the 3 years following Operation Blackout, including many innocent bystanders who were caught in crossfire or targeted in cases of mistaken identity. The economic impact on the community was devastating, as businesses closed, property values collapsed, and residents fled to safer neighborhoods. The social fabric of South Central was permanently damaged by the combination of the original destruction and the ongoing violence that followed, creating trauma and dysfunction that affected multiple generations. The operation that was supposed to eliminate our enemies had actually made everyone less safe and destroyed the very community we claimed to be protecting. The personal cost of leading Operation Blackout was something I didn't fully understand until years later, when the adrenaline and pride of success had faded and I was left to deal with the reality of what I had done. The technical achievement of coordinating such a complex operation was undeniable, but the human cost was staggering. Over 300 people had been made homeless in a single night, families had lost everything they owned, and children had been traumatized by the sudden destruction of their homes and neighborhoods. The guilt over the innocent people who had been hurt was overwhelming, but I couldn't show weakness or remorse without undermining my position within the organization. I had to maintain the image of the successful demolition expert who had achieved a historic victory against our enemies, even as I was beginning to understand that the victory was hollow and the costs were higher than any benefit we had gained. The isolation that came with being responsible for such destruction was complete. I couldn't talk to anyone about what I had done, couldn't seek counseling or support, couldn't even acknowledge to myself that the operation had been a mistake. The skills that had made me valuable to the PIRU Bloods had also made me a monster who was capable of destroying entire communities for the sake of gang politics. The psychological profile required for demolition work is specific and dangerous, requiring a combination of technical knowledge, strategic thinking, and emotional detachment that can easily become pathological. You have to be able to study buildings for weeks, learning about the families who live there, the children who play in the yards, the elderly people who have spent their entire lives in those homes, and then destroy everything without feeling guilt or remorse. You have to be able to coordinate operations that will displace hundreds of people, eliminate their possessions, and traumatize their children, all while maintaining the focus and precision necessary for technical success. The emotional numbness required for this work doesn't stay contained to your professional activities. It spreads into every aspect of your life, making it impossible to form meaningful relationships or feel genuine emotions about anything. I became a machine designed for destruction, efficient and effective but completely hollow inside. The respect and fear I commanded within the organization came at the cost of my own humanity, and by the time I realized what I had become, I was too deep in the role to see a way out that didn't involve my own destruction. The technical aspects of large-scale demolition operations require knowledge and skills that are typically only available to military specialists, construction professionals, and government agencies. The explosives used in Operation Blackout were military-grade materials that had to be acquired through black market channels and required specialized training to use safely and effectively. The timing devices and remote detonation systems were sophisticated electronic equipment that needed technical expertise to program and coordinate across multiple targets. The structural analysis required to identify the most effective points of attack involved engineering knowledge that took years to develop and perfect. The coordination of 20 specialists across 50 targets required communication systems, transportation logistics, and operational security measures that rivaled those used by special forces units. The fact that a gang organization could acquire these capabilities and use them successfully demonstrated the evolution of criminal enterprises beyond traditional law enforcement capabilities. The techniques and knowledge developed for Operation Blackout were later used by other criminal organizations, creating an arms race between gangs and law enforcement that continues today. The community impact of Operation Blackout went far beyond the immediate destruction and displacement, creating long-term trauma and dysfunction that affected multiple generations. Children who witnessed the destruction of their homes and neighborhoods developed anxiety disorders, behavioral problems, and an inability to trust that their environment was safe and stable. Families who lost everything they owned struggled with poverty, homelessness, and the psychological stress of starting over with nothing. Elderly residents who had lived in the same homes for decades were forced to relocate to unfamiliar neighborhoods where they had no support systems or community connections. The economic impact rippled through the entire area as businesses closed, property values collapsed, and investment fled to safer locations. The social networks that had held the community together were shattered by the displacement and trauma, making it difficult for residents to organize effective responses to the ongoing violence and dysfunction. The operation that was supposed to eliminate a criminal organization had actually destroyed the social infrastructure that made community life possible, creating conditions that made crime and violence more likely rather than less. The media coverage of Operation Blackout played a crucial role in shaping public understanding of gang warfare and the capabilities of criminal organizations. The extensive television and newspaper coverage brought national attention to the sophistication of modern gang operations, challenging stereotypes about street-level criminals and highlighting the evolution of organized crime in urban America. The coverage also sensationalized the violence and destruction, creating a narrative of gang warfare that emphasized the spectacular nature of the attacks rather than their human cost. The technical details of the operation were widely reported, potentially providing information that could be used by other criminal organizations to plan similar attacks. The failure of law enforcement to solve the case or prevent similar incidents was extensively documented, contributing to public perceptions about the inadequacy of traditional policing methods for dealing with sophisticated criminal enterprises. The media attention also created a form of celebrity status around the operation and its participants, potentially encouraging copycat attacks and glamorizing the use of destruction as a tool of gang warfare. The evolution of gang warfare tactics since Operation Blackout reflects the ongoing arms race between criminal organizations and law enforcement agencies. The success of the operation demonstrated that traditional gang warfare methods were obsolete, and that future conflicts would require higher levels of technical sophistication, strategic planning, and operational coordination. Other criminal organizations began investing in technical training, military equipment, and professional expertise to develop their own demolition and destruction capabilities. Law enforcement agencies responded by developing new investigative techniques, surveillance technologies, and tactical capabilities designed to detect and prevent sophisticated criminal operations. The result has been an escalation in both the capabilities and the destructiveness of gang warfare, with conflicts becoming more militarized and more devastating to the communities where they occur. The techniques pioneered in Operation Blackout have been adapted and refined by criminal organizations around the world, making large-scale destruction a standard tool of organized crime rather than an exceptional event. Before I finish my story, I need something from you. If this video has impacted you in any way, if it's made you think differently about gang warfare, about the evolution of criminal organizations, about the community impact of organized crime, I need you to share it. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's someone in your family who doesn't understand how sophisticated modern gangs have become. Maybe it's a community leader who's dealing with organized crime in their neighborhood. Maybe it's a young person who's attracted to the technical aspects of criminal activity without understanding the human cost. Your share could help people understand the reality of modern gang warfare and the importance of community-based prevention efforts. Your comment could reach someone who's been affected by gang violence and needs to know that healing and recovery are possible. Your engagement helps this message reach more people who need to understand that technical skills can be used for construction or destruction, and that the choice between them determines whether you become a builder or a monster. I also want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your thoughts, your experiences, your questions, whether you agree with everything I've said or not, whether my story resonates with you or challenges you. I want to know. This conversation doesn't end when the video stops. It continues in the comments, in the discussions you have with your families, in the choices you make when faced with opportunities to use your skills for positive or negative purposes. So please, take a moment right now to engage with this content. Your voice matters, your story matters, and together we can create change that prevents other communities from experiencing the kind of destruction that Operation Blackout inflicted on south-central Los Angeles. Share your own experiences with community building and healing. Tell me about times when you've seen technical skills used for positive purposes, or ask questions about how to help communities recover from organized crime and violence. To anyone watching this who has technical skills, engineering knowledge, or specialized training that could be used for destructive purposes, I want you to know that you have a choice about how to use those abilities. The same knowledge that can be used to destroy buildings can be used to construct them. The same skills that can eliminate infrastructure can be used to build it. And the same coordination abilities that can organize destruction can be used to organize community development. The choice between construction and destruction is ultimately a choice about what kind of person you want to be and what kind of legacy you want to leave. I spent 7 years using my technical knowledge to destroy communities and displace families, and the guilt and trauma of that experience will stay with me for the rest of my life. But I've also spent the last 15 years using those same skills to help communities rebuild, to train young people in construction and engineering, and to demonstrate that technical expertise can be a force for positive change rather than destruction. The respect and satisfaction that come from building something positive are far greater than anything I ever felt from destroying other people's homes and lives. My name is Carlos, and I was the destroyer, the PIRU blood demolition expert who orchestrated the most devastating property destruction campaign in Los Angeles gang history. Today, I choose to be known as someone who uses technical knowledge to build rather than destroy, who believes in the power of construction over destruction, who works every day to help communities heal from the trauma of organized crime and violence. This is my story, my confession, and my warning about what happens when technical skills are used for destructive purposes rather than constructive ones. The 50 houses I destroyed in one night represented more than just buildings. They were homes, families, communities, and dreams that were eliminated for the sake of gang politics and personal pride. The 300 people who were displaced, the children who were traumatized, the families who lost everything, they deserved better than to become casualties in a war that served no purpose beyond feeding the egos of criminals who had lost sight of their own humanity. If this video has impacted you, please don't just watch and move on. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. your story, or your questions. Your engagement helps this message reach more people, and your voice adds to the conversation that can prevent future tragedies. Remember, technical skills are tools that can be used for construction or destruction, community building or community destroying, and the choice you make determines whether you become a builder or a monster. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the solution. Stay constructive, choose building over destroying, and never let pride or anger turn your abilities into weapons against your own community.